Welcome back to War Thunder. Welcome to the tank review on the A43 Black Prince, which is a rank 4 battle rating 6.0 British premium heavy tank. The Black Prince is in one respect very unique within the British tech tree, and that is the combination of really sturdy armor, especially on a not top end tier tank, and a very rapid firing 17 pounder on a heavy tank. If this is worth your money is at the end of the day up to you which value you bring to the table to certain arguments. However, I think this tank is not bad, but you have to learn some tips and tricks that I hopefully will give you in this tank review to make it work properly. And the thing about the Black Prince is that I personally was always interested when I played through the tech tree when it came out, how the 17 pounder would actually work out in the long run if it would be mounted on a platform that could handle certain return fire. Now, in this respect, we have actually a problem with the experience so far. When you grind your way up through rank 1, 2 and 3, you might come across certain issues with British tanks. You can't one-shot your enemy as reliable as with, for example, Russian or German tanks. You have a very bad reverse gear, and the rate of fire is not always good enough to make up for the lack of damage output. And because the problem of having a tank that has a bad reverse gear and not a very devastating gun and not enough armor to take the return shot brings you very often in disastrous situations that you could have handled in other nations' tanks of the same category. Is the Black Prince such a kind of bad example of British engineering, or is it indeed a nice tank to play? Well, you certainly have to adapt to the playstyle, and the tank still suffers from a not very convincing damage output of the gun on average. On the other hand, it brings some other nice facts with it, and when you adapt to the playstyle, you actually don't struggle that much in an up tier as with other tanks of the same battle rating. Overall, I think that the Black Prince performs better in an up tier than, for example, its German counterpart, the Tiger E. As usual with such tank reviews, I give you a full rundown on the statistics about this tank and its main competitors on the battlefield, to which I will also compare it. But I also will give you tips and tricks how to make it work effectively on the battlefield, but also how to take it out when you have to face it. So let's begin with the armor, and we can see that the lower plate here is around about 150 millimeters thick effective thickness, with a little bit of angling, some strong points here, and we have different steps here. This one is around about 170 millimeters effective. This step here is not very thick, I'm sorry, with 57 millimeters thickness. However, 70 degrees of angle allows you to ricochet a lot of shells on this upper plate, which then just can't get through because they lost too much energy here, with 152 millimeters. That is really thick. That is 50% more than, for example, on its German counterpart, the Tiger E. However, it is also flat. Then we have this machine gun port, but it is very tricky to hit, and there are areas that are even stronger with 20 millimeters additional armor around it. And then we also have those armor plates behind the front wheels of the tracks, which is actually a weak spot on the Churchill Mark 7, but is not a weak spot on the Black Prince. So many people say that the Black Prince is just a Churchill Mark 7 with a different turret. That is not true. It has actually significant differences. Overall, the armor is kind of comparable, but this weak spot is removed, and you then have here also those 25 millimeters just being able to ricochet a lot. Then we have the side armor, which is 95mm strong, and it's also flat, but very easy to see. On the upper part of the side armor, behind the upper part of the tracks, we have 82mm, so that is then comparable to the Tiger indeed. And those around about 70mm of thickness here behind the lower part of the tracks is actually a bit reinforced, partially by those structural steel of chassis, so you actually have the most part the same thickness as of here. We have some additional tracks here. The rear is relatively thin, so you can actually go through there with certain AAAs. And also this part here is easy to penetrate. Then we have also the upper part over the engine deck with 18mm. That is really not too good. And we have some slits with 19mm, but again there is some protective armor there as well. The front part, however, is here 25mm. This part here, which could be the driver's hatch, sort of, is 19mm. So yeah, that means that cannon fire from planes actually can damage this heavy tank. The roof here is 38mm of the turret, and we have 18 here again, so the hatches are reinforced. They are twice as thick as this part here, but overall it's not very protective, to be honest. The turret is again a little bit more complicated. Overall we have here a lot of plates with 152mm, and the gun mantle and the turret front here have a lot of overlays, so partially we are looking at over 300mm of effective armor. And we also have some rounding and curving, giving it a bit more effective thickness than 152mm. We have here the machine gun, but that is not really a weak spot, as behind there is again this 152mm, if I'm not mistaken. It's not so clear. Furthermore, we have here at the bottom of the turret this 50mm additional plate. That means that the 150mm of the turret front has additional 50mm, so effective thickness just by that is 200mm, together with the overlay of partially the gun mantle, gives you over 250mm of effective armor on this area here. Many people shoot there and they don't get through. Furthermore, we have to talk about angling. Now, the thing with the Black Prince is that the turret has a hexagonal shape. That means 6 plates are here mounted together. And so that means you don't have like a rounded turret, for example on the Tiger or the IS series of tanks. But you also don't have this kind of square-shaped turret form, for example, which is more or less the King Tiger's form. So when we angle the hull and the turret as well, we can see that the armor thickness drastically increases, and we can have here around about 200mm on the side and the front. That is significantly better than when you angle, for example, the Tiger or the Tiger E, which have a best overlap angling of around about 140mm. That gives this tank so much better effective armor. It is incredible hard, especially at long ranges. Same goes for the turret, although this part here is also 152mm. Combine this with all the overlays and the separate armor plates, and combine this also with wiggling forwards and backwards, and this tank can be a pure fortress. So having this in mind, we then have to talk about the interior. And the interior is actually great. The tank has a lot of room, and we have 5 crew members, the driver and the machine gunner sitting in the front, like with so many German vehicles, you have 2 people sitting in the front and we have 3 crew members in the turret. Typically for British tanks, the gunner and the commander sit on the left hand side while the loader sits on the right hand side. Furthermore, we have here the engine with the transmission and the fuel tanks in the back. So no frontal transmission that could protect the machine gunner and the driver from shrapnels or absorb APHE shells. And then we have those ammo racks. And as we can see, the ammo racks lie directly behind this central armor plating. And yeah, there we have a lot of ammunition, 89 rounds in total. In my opinion, it is very important to take out this ammo rack and then also those 2. And then it is personal preference how much ammunition you still want to have in your tank. Very important is that this ammo rack gets emptied first, then this one, then this one, and then this one, and then this one. So those 2 ammo racks still remain in the tank to the last. And as you can see, such one ammo rack consists of 14 shells, so those 2 ammo racks give you 28 rounds of ammunition, and this 9 can be an option if you run through your ammunition relatively quickly, which you actually can. So when you shoot this tank from the side, just aim directly here from the front, a bit low. You will take out the gunner and hit potentially 2 or even 3 ammo racks. And yeah, so overall I have to say that this tank takes also a massive amounts of damage for the gun breech after penetration, as the gun breech is relatively big and wide. But overall this tank can absorb enormous amounts of damage, especially because many tanks don't have enough penetration with their standard shell to go through and then have to switch to APDS or APCR shells, and then you just have a linear damage cone, so to speak, and you can survive more successful penetration shots. When we talk about the mobility of the Black Prince, we can immediately see that in this comparison it has by far the weakest engine with just 350 horsepower, and the weight is also on the rather higher end of the spectrum. Just the Carnarvon and the heavy tank number 6 are significantly heavier, and so the Black Prince gets, with its 50 tons, a specific horsepower to ton ratio of 7.0 horsepower per ton. That is disastrously bad. That is just a little bit better than, for example, the Mouse. Also, you can see that all other tanks in this comparison have somewhere between 60 and 96% more horsepower to ton ratio. So nearly double of that. Also, the top speed is by far the lowest with 17.2 kilometers an hour. That is half of what the most other tanks have. And also the reverse gear is the slowest. Even the FV4 202 and the M4A3 E2 76W have twice the reverse speed of the Black Prince, which just has -2 kilometers an hour. The reverse gear, however, is a bit awkward. Now, this tank has reverse gear, unlike the M4A3 E276 and the IS-2. However, it completely needs it. Now, let me explain the Black Prince in terms what it means in battle. First of all, the low horsepower to ton ratio means that it struggles really going uphill, or when you drive this tank on bad terrain, it actually doesn't see the low top speed. But when you're going on flat terrain, where actually the low horsepower to ton ratio would allow it on hard terrain to drive faster, it is limited to the 17.2 kilometers an hour. Especially when you go downhill, you feel like the tank could reach like twice the speed, and that costs you so much time. And at the end of the day, for every downhill on a map, there comes an uphill, which makes you even slower. So the tank is really slow. And in battle, that means that very often the action is already going on, and maybe the battle is even decided before you reach the combat zone, especially on large maps or on maps where the way to the combat area is twisted and you have again a lot of up and down hills. The next thing is, when you drive this tank and you have a rather decent speed around your top speed, you can't turn. You can turn for a few degrees before the driver just has all the problems at his hand with the weak engine and has to go into the neutral steer to turn at all. So you can see the mobility is really bad. The low top speed, the near non-existent reverse speed, the necessity to go always to neutral gear, so standing still, to actually turn at all, with the low horsepower to ton ratio, the low engine power at all. So that is really disastrous. Well, so yeah, but the tank has, as we could see, a lot of armor, and when you angle it, it actually can really bounce a lot of shells or survive it. So what about the business end, the firepower? The Black Prince features a 76.2mm quick-firing 17-pounder with 89 shells in total, with a reload speed for an ace crew of 5.9 seconds. That is really fast. That is as fast in terms of reload rate as the M4A3E2 76, which is based on a medium tank gun, like the Black Prince 17-pounder. So in this comparison you have the lowest caliber, but the highest rate of fire. And when we look at the ace crew qualification reload speed, we can see that this is like 0.4 seconds faster than the FE4-202's 20-pounder gun, which is higher caliber and features nearly the same amount of penetration. We will come to this in a moment. So the reload speed is always on your side, and even the successor, the Carnarvon and the FE4-202 need longer, and the American counterpart is on par with you, and you outclass the heavy tank number 6 by 25% and the IS-2 by 252.5 additional percent of faster reload. So this is a significant difference. The turret rotation speed is also not too bad, with 15.4 seconds, but please keep in mind that those are more or less my personal stats on the turret rotation speeds. They are for expert crews, nearly fully upgraded. And 15.4 seconds is really not that bad. That is more or less on par with the FE4-202 and the Carnarvon, but it is significantly better by around about 25 to 30% in comparison to the heavy tank number 6 and the IS-2, with respectively 12.5 or 11.9 degrees per second. Just the American M4A3E2 76W has significantly better turret rotation speed with 21.1. Again, that is more like medium tank handling in this respect. The gun depression is joint best with the FE4-202, the M4A3E2 76W and the Carnarvon with minus 10 degrees. That outclasses the heavy tank number 6 by 2 degrees and the IS-2 by 7 degrees. The gun elevation is with 20 degrees, also really nice. It is just second again to the American M4A3E2. So in this respect we can see already a pattern emerge. You have disastrous mobility, you have decent armor that relies on angling, and you have a quick firing gun with a low caliber. So what about the ammunition? What brings in War Thunder really the flavor to each tank? On the black prints we have a lot of ammunition types to choose between, and the first one is the shell Mark 1, which is a high explosive shell with 9 millimeters of penetration and 883 meters per second. So the muzzle velocity is not the worst, but the penetration is not good enough. Maybe good enough for some splashing of AAA vehicles, but for more than that it's not good enough. So take a few of them with you, and that's about it. The next shot is the shot Mark 6, which is a simple armor piercing shot and has a muzzle velocity of 883 meters per second and features a penetration value of 160 millimeters at close range against flat armor. So again, this shell is not really what you're looking for. The second armor piercing shell type is the shot Mark 4, which is an APC armor piercing capped solid shot and has around about the same muzzle velocity of 883 meters per second and a little bit increased penetration with 165 meters per second. It also works a little bit better against sloped armor, but again, it is not something special. The third armor piercing shell type is the shot Mark 8, which is an APCBC shell with two caps, one for better penetration against sloped armor and the other one is a ballistic capped shell, so it has better penetration at close ranges and retains that penetration over distance. 883 meters initial muzzle velocity and 171 millimeters of penetration at close range make this the best so-called normal armor piercing shell, but again, it is not what you're looking for. The fifth shell type and the fourth armor piercing shell type that I want to present to you is the shot SV Mark 1, which is an APDS round, armor piercing discarding sabot. It features a muzzle velocity of 1,203 meters per second. That is over 300 meters faster than the other shell types, and it features a fantastic penetration value of 228 millimeters, but it keeps that penetration also very good over distance, and at 1,000 meters you still could theoretically penetrate the turret front of a King Tiger, the Henschel version, and with 1,203 meters per second it is much easier to lead. One downside, although, that has nothing to do with the shell but with the tank, is the limited zoom on the tank's object. So it's kind of difficult to shoot and observe the impact area, as you have a flat trajectory, which is great. The shell reaches its target really fast, so you don't have to aim that much in advance, which is also great. But at around about 500 to 600 meters, it becomes difficult to aim precisely, as the lines with the different distances are very close together. And about APDS, it is a really great shell to penetrate sloped armor in comparison to normal solid shots. However, because it is a sub-caliber round, it can not partial overmatch armor platings except very thin ones, and in this respect can bounce more often against armor plates that solid shots of the same initial caliber could overmatch, and the damage output is also a bit slower. So the solid shots, the normal AP shots, they fragment a little better when penetrating the armor. And again, because of the lack of a high explosive filling, you have to rely on knockouts, for example the crew knockout, or you must aim for specific ammo racks or set the engine 3 times on fire, and so you have to really get an X-ray vision. What really helps you again is the reload rate, which is the fastest in this comparison, and certainly for a heavy tank, that allows you to snipe, for example, the driver and the gunner, and if you're lucky also the commander of a tank, and then follow up for example the loader or the radio operator, for example on German Panther tank, before the enemy tank can even reposition the crew, that helps out greatly. Furthermore, against tanks, for example a King Tiger, you can first disable the gunner, then disable the gun, then immobilize the tank by shooting the lower plate and the transmission. By that time the enemy has regained the for example the gunner, and you can shoot him again, and shortly afterwards also the loader. So you have to find your own rhythm. But furthermore, the high rate of fire allows you to deal with opponents that are far away and that are also relatively fast. And special for the Black Prince, you can deal with multiple opponents at once and support your team greatly by disabling the enemies. This playstyle, however, results in a lot of kill assists. However, a lot of kill assists are also better than nothing, to be honest. And the great survivability just means that you can stay in the battle for longer and have a bigger impact. And at the end of the day, you're also at the combat zone. But as you can think about the high rate of fire, the low damage output, and to put multiple shots into the enemy, again with the high rate of fire, that means that you can run through your ammunition very, very quickly indeed. And it's always a question, how much ammunition do you really take with you? But because there is no ammunition in the turret, you can take a lot of ammunition with you and not risking getting blown up with a turret penetration. So let's have a look at how the tank actually performs here on Mostock in a realistic battle, of course. And let's find out if the tank can do anything on a more open map. And you know, this is the version where on top with top tier tanks ATGM rule. So I think there are not many ATGMs around the battle rating of 6.0 or up to 7.0 even. I think the only exception is the Stridswagen 81 with its 3 rockets, but thankfully it is also a British tank. So let's just, well, to be honest, in this battle I just thought to myself, well, let's just drive in and let's have a look at how the tank actually performs when engaging enemy targets at long ranges. A common belief within War Thunder is that German tanks are long range snipers and excel at long ranges. I have to say, I don't really feel it with German tanks that much, especially when I compare, for example, the Tiger to this tank, to the Black Prince. The Tiger just is, it again behaves more like a medium tank, to be honest. Your major opponent is the Panther in terms of long range engagement, because it also has a gun that fires rather quickly, the Panther F that is, because all the other Panthers have the same reload as the short 88, which is kind of surprising. And that was a really nice snapshot. And the second shot kills him. Nice. And I survived it from a Sture Emil. No, it was a Dicke Max. I'm sorry. Now the Dicke Max has also a penetration exceeding 200 millimeters. And now let's engage the Tiger 1. And we got his gunner. So this tank is also quite a distance away from us, but we can keep pumping in the shots into him. At the end of the battle, you will see that we kind of run through a lot of our ammunition, which should not come as a surprise. Again, the high rate of fire and the rather low damage output in combination with shooting at tanks with high survivability against solid shots, for example the Germans, just lets you run through those APDS shells real quick. In my opinion, this tank performs really great when you have one position where you know where the enemy is shooting from, so you angle against multiple opponents at once, and this poor Panther 4 has really no chance. But I have to say, double strikes are always nice and not that common in British tanks. So we're slowly but steadily approaching actually the middle of the battlefield, and this Panther just exploded. But before that, he was responsible for lighting up the Comet, which got taken out by a Tiger 2P. The thing that I really have problems with is the constant up tier of this tank. 6.0 is not a nice battle rating. Everybody that drives a Tiger E or even a Tiger H1 knows that you are good at your own battle rating when you play it right and you can control the engagement. But the second you get up tiered, your armor becomes more and more pointless, and yeah, you have to depend on your mobility, which is kind of strange when we talk about heavy tanks that should rely on their mobility. As I said, the mobility of the Black Prince is just disastrous in comparison to all other tanks. In this respect, it is not too much different from a T95. But unlike the T95, it doesn't have one big huge weak spot where enemies constantly penetrate you and knock you out in one shot, just, you know, going around your armor, so to speak. And your survivability is really great. In this respect, you're more like a King Tiger, to be honest. 5 crew members, of which 2 are sitting in the front, making one-shotting this tank from the front rather challenging, to be honest. Furthermore, I have to say, I cannot stress it out how nice it is to be not a walk-over tank when you once do not angle it for T-3485s. In fact, because of the constant up-tiering, I did not really face too many T-3485s, which is really relaxing. But overall, I did not encounter too many Russian medium tanks. Even T-44s are not such a big problem in this tank, because they don't have the survivability when penetrating them into the turret. Once one shell to the right to take out the gunner and the commander, and the second shell going into the left. And against Russian tanks, you have 2 advantages that normal tanks with APHE shells do not really have, and that is the normalization against sloped armor, which you can find very often on Russian tanks. T-34s, T-44s, the IS tanks and so on, they are kind of in your battle rating region. And you practically have a bigger front area on those turrets in comparison to German tanks that you actually can penetrate the enemy on. Because you have really high penetration, over 220 millimeters at close ranges, you retain that penetration, and APDS works normally better against sloped armor. Again, counter mechanic is, so to speak, that you have a sub-caliber shell with the APDS, so you can't overmatch any kind of armor, like for example the IS-2 can with its rather big 122mm shell, and sometimes you just bounce at awkward angle. For example, a very good example would be when you shoot at the side of a Panther when it is slightly angled. An IS-2 mostly will actually partially overmatch it, because the shell is 3 times the thickness of the armor if we are looking at the first Panthers. On the other hand, when you shoot at it, you have the penetration to go through, but at such an extreme angle, when you have not the partial overmatch mechanic, you bounce. But overall, if you have a armor plating that is too thick for getting overmatched, the IS-2's 122mm will overall perform less good than your 17-pounder. That is just a kind of experimental, or let's say experience overall in the gameplay. So here on Mostock, what we basically did was approaching our cap circle and then eliminating some rather dangerous opponents with multiple shots at rather long range, which was really nice and rather easy, to be honest. And then we just kept on rolling forwards and went through the enemy's cap circle, which we then helped decapping a little bit. And currently I'm now rolling through, and by that time the match is already decided. Just one enemy is left, and it is a B409. Must be, I think that's either an F or an G with a bomb. And as you could see, I was really struggling going up that slope. Another problem is the gears. Because of your low horsepower to ton ratio, the driver has to shift at high revs, and if you don't go up to high revs, it takes a while up until he shifts into the second gear. Nevertheless, we survived this battle, and let's have a quick look at the post-battle results. And as we can see, for 5 kills and 3 assists, we got over 61,000 silver lines and 6,532 research points for our ace. That's a decent result, if I may say so myself. We got the usual cluster of awards. Survivor and Heavy Metal Fury is always nice, putting us on second place with 1,867 score points. So second place is not too bad. Anyways, that's it with the Churchill variant, the Black Prince. It is a nice tank, but you have to have the patience to get around the slow speed and so on. You constantly have to think about angling yourself and to have a good situational awareness. Support your team with long range fire, communicate with it, and this tank can also absorb a lot of damage. It can survive so much longer than your usual British tank up until this battle rating. And specifically regarding arcade and also the difference to realistic battles, overall I think that this tank, because of the neutral steering and the low horsepower to ton ratio in realistic, performs better in critical situations in arcade. Also, the high rate of fire is really nice to have in arcade, and as you could see in the beginning, it just felt more alive. This is of course true to many tanks, but specifically this tank, because of its disastrous horsepower to ton ratio, really has the edge in arcade comparison to realistic. On the other hand, in realistic, because you can absorb so many shots, you will bounce so many shells and so on, you can collect a lot of spawn points for a tank. And so when you get taken out, you very often have a respawn available, which is not that usual for a heavy tank because of its rather high costs in spawn points in comparison to medium tanks or even light tanks. Anyways, that's it for this tank review. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give this video a like if you did. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this tank, and if you think that it is worth the price, and if you have it, if you enjoy it, if you play against it very often, if you think it is a walkover tank or it really is a hard nut to crank. And yeah, if you want to see more, please subscribe, and we will see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.